The air in the great hall of Silvercrest was heavy with the scent of cold stone and burning herbs, a fragrance meant to sanctify, but to Solara, it smelled only of endings. Moonlight, stark and unforgiving, fell in a silver blade from the high-arched window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silent, waiting air. She knelt on a cushion of crimson velvet, her head bowed so low the ceremonial veil of woven moon silk brushed against the icy floor. Every breath was a shard of glass in her lungs, every beat of her heart a drum counting down the seconds of her freedom. The collective gaze of 200 of the most powerful shifters on the continent pressed down on her, a physical weight that threatened to crush her fragile bones. She was an Omega, a pawn in a game of kings. And this was the final move. But the vows were a lie, and the man who stood before her was a ghost, wearing a crown. He was called King Dareth Caelorn, Alpha of the Silver Packs, and his presence was a living storm. Even with her eyes fixed on the intricate weave of the rug beneath her, she could feel him. A monolith of power and control. Whispers had followed him for years, stories of a ruler as ruthless as he was magnificent, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a soul forged in the heart of the mountains. He had not spoken a single word to her, not since her arrival as a political offering from her home pack, the Winth. She was the price of peace, the fragile seal on an alliance that would prevent a bloody war. The High Elder's voice echoed in the cavernous hall, the ancient words of the binding rite rolling over her like a tide. Do you, Solara of the Winth Pack, accept this Alpha as your mate, your king and your bond? Do you swear to honor the pact, to join your blood to his, and to carry the future of the Silver Packs in your womb? Her throat was a desert. Carry the future. The words were a cruel joke. She was barren, a flaw she had hidden with desperate shame her entire life. Her Omega nature was a muted thing, her inner wolf a timid whisper where others held a roar. She could not shift, could not fight, could not bear children. She was a hollow vessel, beautiful on the outside, empty within. Her own Alpha had known this, yet he had offered her anyway, gambling that the king would be too proud to reject her once the alliance was announced. I do, she breathed, the words stolen from her lungs. The lie felt like poison on her tongue. The king's voice, when it came, was as deep and resonant as she had imagined, yet it held a strange clipped edge, a note of something brittle beneath the power. And do you, Dareth of the House of Caelorn, accept this Omega as your mate, your queen, and your bond? Do you swear to protect her, to join your life to hers, and to honor the sacred pact between our packs? I do, he said. The finality of it was a slammed door. The elder raised a silver chalice. Then let the bond be sealed. Let the mark be given. What the moon has witnessed, let no wolf tear asunder. Solara felt a tremor of pure primal terror. This was the moment of truth. The mating mark was more than a symbol. It was a conduit, a living link between two souls that was meant to blaze to life. With a fire so intense it would reshape them both. It was a moment of utter vulnerability, of divine connection. She had dreamt of it as a pup, of a warmth that would finally chase away the cold loneliness of her flawed existence. The king moved. The scent of him, sharp, clean, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with expensive oils, enveloped her. He reached out, his fingers cool and steady as they brushed the veil aside. She flinched, keeping her gaze lowered, her lashes dark against her pale cheeks. She could not bear to look at him, to see the disappointment or disgust in his eyes when the bond between them failed to ignite. His thumb tilted her chin up. It was not a gentle touch. It was an order, a display of ownership for all to see. Slowly, terrified, she lifted her eyes to meet his. The stories had not lied. His face was a masterpiece of harsh, beautiful lines, as if sculpted from mountain granite and moonlight. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth that looked like it had never known a true smile. But his eyes, they were not the color of a winter sky. They were silver, yes, but a flat, polished silver, like a mirror reflecting nothing. They were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of the soul-shaking fire of a true alpha meeting his mate. There was no recognition, no spark, nothing. Her heart plummeted. It was her flaw. She was too broken to even inspire the faintest flicker of the fated bond. He leaned in, his breath a cool whisper against her skin. The entire hall held its breath, waiting for the queen's first gasp of blissful agony, the sign that the magic was taking hold. He lowered his head to the juncture of her neck and shoulder, and for a fleeting, insane moment, she felt a phantom sensation, a scent of deep pine and coming rain, a low growl in her soul that wasn't hers. It was a ghost of a feeling, there and gone in a heartbeat, leaving only the cold reality of the man before her. His teeth grazed her skin. It was not the searing heat she'd been warned of. It was a sharp, clinical pain, like a surgeon's scalpel, a bite, a brand, not a union. A collective sigh of relief and approval rippled through the gathered packs as the mark bloomed on her skin. A delicate swirling pattern of silver that looked like a crescent moon caught in a thorny vine. It was beautiful, and it was dead. It lay upon her skin like a piece of jewelry, cold and foreign. There was no thrum of connection, no fire spreading through her veins, no whisper of his soul in hers. There was only a dull, empty ache. Shame burned through her, hot and suffocating. She had failed. She had failed her pack, failed this king, and failed the sacred rite. She forced herself to remain still, to school her features into a mask of serene acceptance, praying no one could see the lie shimmering on her skin. The king pulled back, his face unreadable. He offered her his hand, and she placed her trembling fingers in his. His grip was like iron as he pulled her to her feet. The ceremony was over. He turned to the assembled crowd, raising their joined hands. "Behold your queen," he declared, his voice ringing with a manufactured triumph that made her skin crawl. The hall erupted in thunderous howls of celebration, a cacophony of sound that crashed over her. She stood beside him, a gilded statue, smiling a fragile, painted smile, while her soul fractured inside her. He held her hand for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that was meant to look possessive and loving, but felt only like a warning. They were led from the great hall through corridors of ancient stone, the sound of the feast beginning behind them. Guards in silver and black livery flanked them, their faces impassive. Her new husband did not speak. He walked with a stiff, regal grace, his eyes forward, his jaw tight. The silence between them was a chasm, vast and terrifying. He was a stranger. She was bound to a stranger. The royal chambers were a world away from the austerity of the great hall. Rich tapestries depicting legendary hunts and ancient battles covered the walls. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows across a massive bed draped in furs. The air smelled of wood smoke, polished cedar, and wealth. It was a beautiful cage. The heavy oak door closed behind them with a definitive thud, shutting out the rest of the world. The sound echoed the slamming of her own prison door. She was alone with him. He released her hand as if it had burned him. He walked to the center of the room, unfastening the heavy silver cloak from his shoulders and letting it fall to the floor in a heap. Without the formal trappings, he seemed different. Less like a king and more like something else, something sharper, more restless. He turned to her, and for the first time, his mask of regal indifference slipped. A smirk, cold and thin, touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "You did well, little Omega," he said, his voice losing its booming public quality. It was softer now, and far more menacing. "You played your part perfectly, so timid, so obedient, exactly as promised." Solara's blood ran cold, the way he said it. It was not the praise of a husband. It was the assessment of a handler evaluating a well-trained animal. She found her voice, a small, wavering thing. "My king?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound that held no humor. "My king, Mantat," he mocked. He stalked toward her, circling her like a predator examining its prey. She stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. "You Winth wolves are all the same, so desperate for power, you'd sell your own kin for a taste of it. Did your alpha even tell you which brother you were truly marrying?" The question hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Brother," she whispered, confusion and fear warring within her. The history spoke of only one heir, King Dareth. His cold silver eyes glinted in the firelight. Oh, did they forget to mention that little detail? How inconvenient. "My twin, the true king, as some would call him." He spat the words like venom. "The one they all fear, the one they all whisper about, the one currently rotting in a northern prison while I keep his throne warm." A wave of dizziness washed over her. Twin? The Kalorn line had not seen twins in 500 years. It was a thing of legend, of prophecy, one of moonlight, one of shadow. You are not Dareth? She stammered, her mind struggling to piece together the terrifying implications. I am now, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. He stopped in front of her, so close she could see the fine threads of a scar near his temple, almost hidden by his dark hair. My name is Malik, and thanks to you, my dear. My claim to this throne is now sealed by a sacred, unbreakable bond. He reached out and traced the cold mark on her neck with his fingertip. The touch was vile, a desecration. It was not a bond, it was a forgery, a chain. The phantom scent returned, stronger this time, pine and wild storm, a scent of raw, untamed power that was nothing like the sterile ozone of the man before her. It was a memory her soul possessed but her mind could not place. A growl echoed in the deepest part of her being, a sound of pure, volcanic fury. It was the sleeping giant of her own dormant wolf, stirring for the first time in her life, awakened by a lie so profound it had shaken the foundations of her world. Her gaze flew to Malik's face, and in his polished silver eyes she saw the truth. She saw the cunning of a fox, the ambition of a usurper, the cold, empty heart of a wolf who had stolen his brother's life. The world tilted, the firelight blurring into streaks of orange and gold. She had not been married. She had been captured. And the mark on her neck was not the symbol of a mate. It was the brand of a slave. Malik's words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of ice. The world, which had already felt fragile, shattered completely, a twin, a lie, a stolen throne. The ornate room seemed to warp around her, the dancing firelight twisting the shadows into monstrous shapes. She took a staggering step back, her hand flying to her throat, to the cold, dead mark that branded her as his property. It felt like a leech on her skin, a parasite siphoning her life away. Why? The word was a choked whisper, torn from a place of disbelief so deep it felt like a physical wound. Malik watched her, a connoisseur of despair. He seemed to draw strength from her shock, his posture straightening, his thin smirk deepening. He moved to a heavy sideboard, pouring a dark amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. He didn't offer one to her. Why? He repeated, swirling the contents of his glass. Because power is not given, little Omega. It is taken, my brother, Dareth. He said the name as if it were a curse, a foul taste in his mouth. He is a creature of instinct, a primal beast fit only for the hunt, not the throne. He feels the pull of the moon, the call of the blood, the rage of our ancestors. He would have led the Silver Packs into a glorious, pointless war, all for the sake of honor and instinct. He is a relic. I am the future. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, his flat silver eyes never leaving hers. Our father, the old king, was a fool. He saw Dareth's raw power and mistook it for strength. He saw my intellect, my strategy, and called it weakness. A flicker of something ancient and bitter crossed his face. He named Dareth his heir, and in doing so, he doomed us all. I did what was necessary. I removed him, for the good of the packs. You imprisoned your own brother, Ihad, she breathed, the horror of it settling like a shroud over her. Family, blood, the pack bond, it was the most sacred law. To betray one's own twin, it was unthinkable. I contained a threat, he corrected smoothly. And now I have consolidated my power. The northern packs follow me, the southern chieftains are appeased. And your pack, the Winth, has given me the final piece, a queen, a beautiful, tragic queen, whose barrenness is, as it turns out, her most useful feature. The cruelty of that last statement struck her harder than any physical blow. He knew. He had known all along. Her deepest shame was not a liability to him, but a tool. A fertile Omega might have formed a true bond, he explained, his voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. Her wolf would have sensed the lie. The mark might have rejected me, or worse, revealed me, but you are a perfect vessel, empty, mute in spirit. Your wolf is so weak, it couldn't even tell the difference between a king and his shadow. The mark took, the alliance is sealed, and my reign is absolute. Each word was a calculated strike, designed to dismantle her, to leave her with nothing. He was telling her that her brokenness was the very thing that made her valuable to him. And as he spoke, something shifted inside Solara. The terror that had paralyzed her began to curdle, to harden into something else. It was a cold, sharp anger, an emotion so foreign she barely recognized it. It was the whisper of her inner wolf, not timid anymore, but stirring from a long slumber, its hackles raised. The phantom scent of pine and storm swirled in her mind again, no longer a fleeting ghost, but a tangible presence. It was a scent of freedom, of wild places, of a power so immense it made Malik's calculated ambition feel like a child's game. It was Dareth's scent. Her soul knew it, even if her mind did not. The bond she had felt, that brief, impossible flicker during the ceremony, it hadn't been a trick of the light. It had been him, reaching for her. "He will come for you," she said. The voice was hers, but it held a new resonance, a low, guttural certainty that surprised even her. Malik laughed, a genuinely amused sound this time. "Will he? From a silver-lined cell 1,000 miles from here, guarded by my most loyal men? He can howl at the moon all he likes. It will not save him." He set his glass down with a sharp click. "And it will not save you." He advanced on her, his predatory grace returning. The firelight cast his shadow long and menacing on the floor, a dark specter reaching for her. "Now the feast will last for hours, but the pack will expect proof of our union, a consummation. We have one more role to play tonight, my dear queen." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She backed away until her legs hit the edge of the massive fur-draped bed. A cage within a cage. He was going to touch her, to defile not just her body, but the sacred act of mating, to further cement his lie. The thought was so repulsive her wolf snarled in her mind, a sound of pure revulsion. "Do not touch me," she whispered, the words trembling with the force of her rage. Malik's eyes narrowed. "You are my wit. You are my queen. You will do as I command." He reached for her, his fingers wrapping around her upper arm. His touch was cold, possessive, a brand of ownership. But the moment his skin met hers, something erupted. The mark on her neck, the dead silver tattoo, blazed with a sudden, searing heat. It was not Malik's power. It was an intrusion, a violent surge of energy from far away. Solara cried out, stumbling back, clutching her neck. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire lancing through her veins. It felt as if a lightning bolt had struck her, aimed directly at the forgery on her skin. Malik recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. He stared at his hand, then at her. What was that? The pain subsided as quickly as it came, leaving behind a deep, resonant thrumming beneath her skin. The mark was no longer cold, it was alive. It pulsed with a furious, alien energy that was not hers, and was certainly not Malik's. It was a beacon, lit in the darkness. It was a call, and it had just been answered. It was in that moment that the sounds from outside changed. The distant muffled roar of the feast, the howls, the laughter, the music, did not fade. It was severed. One moment it was there, a backdrop of celebration. The next, it was gone, replaced by a sudden, unnatural silence that was more terrifying than any scream. The silence was absolute, as if the entire castle, all 200 powerful shifters, had held their breath at once. Malik froze, his head snapping toward the door. Every line of his body went rigid. The polished veneer of the civilized king fell away, revealing the twitchy, nervous predator beneath. "What is it?" he hissed, more to himself than to her. "Guards?" The silence stretched for another heartbeat, heavy and suffocating. Then it was broken. A single booming impact echoed from the direction of the great hall. It was not the sound of a door being opened. It was the sound of a door being obliterated. It was the sound of iron hinges screaming as they were torn from stone, of ancient oak splintering into 1,000 pieces. Shouts erupted, not of celebration, but of shock and alarm. The clash of steel followed, sharp and frantic, then abruptly cut short. A low collective growl rumbled through the very foundations of the castle, a sound of primal fear from wolves who feared nothing. Malik was already moving, grabbing a sheathed sword that had been propped against the wall. His face was pale in the firelight, his silver eyes wide with a dawning, horrified realization. "Impossible," he whispered. He cannot be here. Heavy, thudding footsteps were ascending the main staircase, coming closer. They were unhurried, impossibly steady, each step a hammer blow announcing an inexorable approach. The guards posted outside their chamber door let out choked cries, which were silenced with brutal efficiency. Solara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the slow, steady beat of the approaching footsteps. The thrumming from the mark on her neck intensified, the scent of pine and wild storm-swept mountains flooding her senses, so potent it was almost suffocating. It was him. The great oak door to their chamber shuddered, not from a blow, but as if the air pressure outside had changed. The iron handle turned slowly, deliberately. Malik raised his sword, his knuckles white, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. The door swung inward with a low groan. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the chaos of the corridor beyond, stood a figure that made Malik look like a boy. He was immense, broader at the shoulders, taller by a head, a monolith of raw, untamed power. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and something that looked like blood. He wore the tattered remnants of a prisoner's garb, torn and shredded. Heavy, broken manacles still hung from his wrists, the silver chains dragging on the stone floor. His body was a roadmap of scars, old and new, but he stood as if he felt no pain, only purpose. He took a step into the room, and the firelight fell upon his face. It was the same face as Malik's, the same granite jaw, the same high cheekbones, but it was a world apart. Where Malik's features were sharp and cunning, his were carved with strength and endurance. A jagged scar ran from his temple down across his left eye, which, instead of marring his appearance, only enhanced its savage beauty. And his eyes. They were not the flat, polished silver of his brother. They were the color of a gathering storm, deep and churning with silver light, blazing with fury so profound it seemed to scorch the very air. This was no beast. This was a king. The Alpha's storm-tossed eyes swept the room, dismissing his cowering, sword-wielding brother as if he were nothing more than an insect. Then his gaze landed on Solara. The world stopped. The air crackled. The scent of pine and ozone became an elemental force, a tempest unleashed in the confines of the room. When his eyes met hers, the mark on her neck did not just burn, it detonated. A white-hot, blinding light erupted from the bond, not of pain this time, but of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. A scream of shock and release was torn from her lips. It was a feeling of being ripped apart and put back together, of being lost and found in the same, shattering instant. A current of raw power surged from him to her, clearing the fog from her mind, awakening every dormant cell in her body. Her dormant wolf rose up, not with a snarl, but with a howl of pure, soul-deep recognition. Mate. King Dareth Kalorn, the rightful ruler of the Silver Packs, stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on hers. And as his gaze traced the glowing, corrupted mark on her neck, the mark his brother had stolen, the storm in his eyes became a hurricane, and a low, guttural growl tore from his throat, a promise of retribution that shook the very stones of the castle. The growl that ripped from Dareth's chest was not merely a sound. It was a physical force, a tremor that vibrated through the stone floor and up into Solara's bones. It was the sound of a fault line splitting the world, of a mountain preparing to collapse. It was ancient, primal, and filled with a fury so profound it eclipsed every other sensation in the room. The fire in the hearth seemed to shrink from it, the flames pulling back as if in fear. Solara was frozen, caught between the two brothers, a fragile prize in a war that had just begun. The mark on her neck blazed, a beacon of purest silver fire. It no longer felt like a brand of shame, but a point of searing connection to the true Alpha King standing in the doorway. It was a homing signal, and its owner had come to claim it. Every nerve ending in her body sang with a terrifying, exhilarating awareness of him. She could feel the coiled power in his muscles, the thunderous beat of his heart, the hurricane of rage and possession swirling in his soul. Malik, however, seemed to find his courage in the face of the inevitable. The terror in his eyes was replaced by the manic bravado of a cornered animal. "Brother," he spat, the word dripping with venom. He shifted his stance, the point of his sword wavering slightly but still aimed at Dareth's heart. "Escaping your cell was foolish. Returning here is suicide. The guards are loyal to their king. Dareth's voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep within the earth. He took another deliberate step into the room, the broken chains on his wrists clinking with a sound like funeral bells. He didn't even glance at the sword. His storm-gray eyes were fixed on Solara, on the glowing mark, on the violation it represented. And they have finally recognized him. That simple statement explained the impossible silence, the swift collapse of the castle's defenses. The guards had not been defeated. They had defected. The moment they saw their true alpha, the primal instinct of the pack, the allegiance that ran deeper than fear or bribery, had taken over. They had bowed to the rightful king. Malik's face contorted in a mask of disbelief and fury. They are weak-willed fools, swayed by brute force. They will pay for their treason. It is you who will pay, Dareth said, his voice dropping even lower, and for the first time he tore his gaze from Solara and pinned his brother with a look of pure, undiluted loathing. You stole my throne. You imprisoned me. You starved my pack of its honor. These are things I might, in time, have forgiven. He took another step, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The scent of pine and storm intensified, a living presence in the air. But you put your hands on what is mine, he growled, and the temperature in the room plummeted. You marked my mate. The possessive claim, so raw and absolute, struck Solara with the force of a physical blow. My mate. He had never spoken to her, never touched her, yet he declared it with a certainty that defied all logic, all ceremony, all law. It was a truth that existed outside of vows and veils, a fact written in the fabric of their souls. And hearing it spoken aloud, in that voice of thunder and stone, sent a tremor of something dangerously close to hope through her. Malik let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Your mate? She is my wife, bound by the old rites, witnessed by 100 alphas. The mark is given. She is mine by law. There is a law that stands above all others, Dareth countered, his voice a lethal calm. The law of the bond, and you are a thief standing in stolen light. With a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size, Dareth moved. He didn't rush. He flowed. One moment he was by the door, the next he was before Malik, the tip of his brother's sword a mere inch from his chest. He didn't stop. He walked directly into the blade. There was a sickening scrape of steel against flesh and bone. Solara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But Dareth didn't even flinch. He simply reached out, his massive hand closing around Malik's throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. Malik choked, his eyes bulging, his legs kicking uselessly. The sword clattered from his nerveless fingers to the floor. He clawed at Dareth's arm, but it was like clawing at granite. You are nothing, Dareth rasped, his face inches from his twins. The fury in his eyes was a contained inferno. A shadow, a whisper. You tried to sever my connection to the pack, to the moon, to myself. But you could not sever this. He squeezed, and a sickening crunch echoed in the silent room. Malik went limp, his body convulsing. Solara thought he would kill him. She watched, horrified and yet unable to look away, as the life began to drain from the usurper's face. But at the last moment, Dareth's expression changed. A flicker of something, control, strategy, the mind of a king reasserting itself over the rage of the beast, surfaced. With a final contemptuous snarl, he hurled Malik across the room. The false king crashed into the stone wall near the hearth and crumpled to the floor in a heap, unconscious but alive. The room fell silent once more. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and Dareth's own harsh, ragged breaths. He stood over his fallen brother for a long moment, his chest rising and falling, the shallow wound in his chest already beginning to knit itself closed. Then slowly, as if moving through deep water, he turned to face her. The inferno in his eyes was banked now, but the heat remained. He looked at her, and it was as if he was seeing her for the first time and had been seeing her his entire life. His gaze was intense, possessive, but it held something else, too. A question, an ache. Solara stood by the bed trembling, her own inner wolf a whirlwind of conflicting instincts. It wanted to submit, to bare her throat in deference to this overwhelming alpha presence. It wanted to run to him, to press the throbbing mark against his skin and feel the connection complete itself. And a terrified human part of her simply wanted to hide. She was the Omega who had married the wrong twin, the broken vessel who had enabled this disaster. What must he think of her? He took a slow step toward her. Then another. He moved with a heavy, pained grace, and she realized for the first time the true cost of his escape. He was not just scarred. He was wounded, exhausted down to his soul. The power he projected was a force of will, a king's command over his own failing body. He stopped just before her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She was bathed in his scent, enveloped in his presence. It was overwhelming, a force of nature that made the gilded room feel like a fragile dollhouse. "He hurt you," Dareth stated. It wasn't a question. His gaze was locked on the still glowing mark on her neck. She couldn't find her voice. She could only give a small, jerky shake of her head. He had not hurt her, not physically. He had merely tried to annihilate her soul. Dareth's hand came up, slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers were calloused and scarred, the hand of a warrior, not a courtly king. She stood her ground, her heart hammering, her breath caught in her throat. He didn't touch her. Instead, his fingers hovered a mere breath away from the mark. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the raw power thrumming just beneath the surface. The mark on her neck pulsed in response, a silent, desperate conversation passing between them. "His filth is on you," he murmured, his voice thick with a mixture of fury and regret. "On my mark, on my mate." The shame she had felt before Malik was nothing compared to the wave of inadequacy that washed over her now. She was tainted, complicit. She had knelt before the wrong man, taken a false vow, and worn this corrupted symbol. I didn't know," she whispered, the words tasting of ash. His stormy eyes finally lifted from the mark to meet hers. For a long moment he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. He saw everything. Her fear, her shame, her brokenness. She braced herself for the judgment, the dismissal. The true king had returned, and he had found a flawed, counterfeit queen. But what she saw in his eyes was not contempt. It was a deep, soul-shaking sorrow. "I know," he said, his voice softer than she could have imagined. "I felt it. I felt your fear. I felt the lie, from 1,000 miles away, in a cage of stone and silver. I felt him touch you, and it burned." His gaze held hers, and in their depths, she saw his own prison. She saw the isolation, the betrayal, the agony of feeling his throne, his pack, and his fated mate being stolen from him while he was powerless to stop it. He had not just escaped a physical cell, he had clawed his way back from a living hell, guided by the single, fragile tether of a bond that should not have been possible. A lone tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear for him, for his pain, as much as for her own. His expression softened further. The warrior king receded, and for a fleeting instant, she saw only the man, the mate. He finally closed the small distance between them, his thumb coming up to gently, reverently, brush the tear from her skin. His touch was like lightning, a jolt of pure energy that shot through her entire body. It was warm and real, and it felt more right than anything she had ever known. But the moment was shattered by a commotion from the corridor. Heavy footsteps, urgent voices. "My king, we have secured the lower levels. The council members are—" One of the royal guards, a grizzled old wolf with a scarred face, appeared in the doorway. He stopped short, his eyes taking in the scene. The unconscious Malik, the shattered chains, and his king standing intimately close to the new queen. He immediately dropped to one knee. "King Dareth," the guard breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Forgive the intrusion. The pack awaits your command." Dareth did not turn. He did not take his eyes off Solara. His hand dropped from her face, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. The king was back. The moment of connection severed by the weight of the crown he had yet to reclaim. "The pack has its king," Dareth said, his voice once again a command. He turned his head slightly, addressing the guard without looking at him. "Take my brother to the dungeons. Put him in the very cell he made for me. Double the guard. No one sees him. No one speaks to him. Is that understood?" "Yes, my king." "What of the council? Those who stood with him?" "Most have surrendered, your majesty. They claim they were deceived. A few fought." The guard's voice was grim. "Their treason will be judged at sunrise. Dareth declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned back to Solara, and the weight of the world seemed to settle on his broad shoulders. The room was no longer a private space. It was the heart of a coup, the center of a kingdom in turmoil, and she was standing at the epicenter. His eyes swept over her again, taking in her ceremonial white gown, the moon-silk veil pooled at her feet, the symbols of a wedding that had been a lie. He saw not a queen, but a prisoner in a different kind of cage. "You are not safe here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "His scent lingers, his supporters are still within these walls. They will see you as his possession, a symbol of his claim." He reached down and with one powerful tug, ripped a heavy, fur-lined tapestry from the wall. It fell in a cascade of dark wool and embroidered silver thread. He draped it around her shoulders, covering the white dress, hiding her from view. It was heavy and smelled of dust, stone, and faintly of him, of pine and storm. It was the most comforting thing she had ever felt. "Stay close to me," he commanded, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Do not leave my side." He offered her his arm. It was not a gesture of courtly grace. It was a lifeline. Hesitantly, she placed her hand on his forearm. The muscle beneath his tattered sleeve was like solid rock. As her fingers touched him, the mark on her neck pulsed with a gentle, reassuring warmth. It was no longer a beacon of alarm, but a quiet hum of belonging. Together, they walked out of the chamber, leaving the wreckage of her wedding night and the unconscious form of the false king behind them. They stepped into the corridor, into the heart of the storm, and into a future that was as uncertain and terrifying as the look in her true king's eyes. The journey from the royal chamber to the great hall was a walk through a waking nightmare. The corridors of Silvercrest, once silent and regal, were now lined with the grim tableau of a swift and brutal coup. Loyal guards in silver and black stood over the disarmed and bound forms of those who had sided with Malik. The scent of fresh blood, sharp and metallic, mingled with the ozone of spilled alpha rage. Wolves, men and women, knelt as Dareth passed, their heads bowed low, a wave of submission rippling before him. Solara walked within the circle of his presence, shrouded in the heavy tapestry, her hand resting on the unyielding muscle of his forearm. She could feel the eyes of the pack on her, feel their confusion, their suspicion. She was a ghost at this feast of consequences, the bride of the fallen king, now on the arm of the true one. What were they to make of her? Was she a prize, a traitor, a victim? She didn't know the answer herself. Her inner wolf, so long a dormant creature, was awake and alert. Every sense stretched to a painful degree of sensitivity. It recognized the deference shown to Dareth, not as a political courtesy, but as a deep, instinctual truth. This was the Alpha, the pack's anchor, its true north, and it recognized Solara's place, pressed against his side, as fundamentally correct. The human part of her, however, was terrified. As they reached the massive, splintered archway of the Great Hall, the full scope of the night's events became clear. The long tables were overturned, spilled wine staining the rushes on the floor like dark blood. The celebratory feast was a wreckage. In the center of the hall, the remaining members of the Pack Council stood clustered together, a nervous herd of powerful predators. They were the alphas of the vassal packs, the chieftains, the elders, the pillars of the kingdom, and their faces were a mixture of awe, fear, and deep uncertainty. The moment Dareth stepped across the threshold, a hush fell over the assembly. Every eye locked on him, on the tattered prisoner's rags, the broken silver manacles, the raw, bleeding wound on his chest, and the sheer, indomitable power that radiated from him like heat from a forge. And then, their eyes slid to her, the small, cloaked figure at his side, her face pale in the torchlight, her neck glowing with the impossible living mark of the Kalorn kings. Dareth did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stopped just inside the hall, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over the gathered wolves, and spoke in a low rumble that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "The House of Kalorn endures." It was a simple statement, but it landed with the weight of a royal decree. A collective sigh of relief and tension went through the room. "My brother," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "attempted to usurp what was his by neither birthright nor strength. He ruled through lies and shadows. That time is over. The dawn brings a new tide. You will either stand with it, or you will be washed away. His gaze settled on the council of elders. You stood by and witnessed a false rite. You watched a thief place a stolen crown on his head. You have much to answer for. An old wolf, his face a mask of wrinkled pride, and his white hair braided with silver rings, stepped forward. Solara recognized him as Lord Vorlog, chieftain of the Stone River Pack, a traditionalist known for his rigid adherence to law. King Dareth, Vorlog began, his voice raspy but strong. We welcome your return. We were deceived. Malik's cunning was a serpent in our midst. He bowed his head stiffly, a gesture of respect that was clearly hard-won. But the law is the law. The rite was performed. The vows were spoken. His gaze, sharp and accusatory, flicked to Solara. This Omega wears his mark. She is by sacred vow his wife. What are we to make of this union? A king can't take his brother's wife as his own. It is an unclean thing. The challenge was laid bare. It wasn't just about the throne anymore. It was about her. The taint of Malik was upon her, and in their eyes, it made her an obstacle, a complication, a stain on the honor of their returned king. Shame, cold and familiar, washed over her. He was right. She was unclean. Dareth's grip on his own control was absolute, but Solara felt the tremor of rage that went through his arm. He turned his head slightly, his eyes still on Vorlog, but his next words were for the entire hall. You speak of the law, Lord Vorlog. Dareth's voice was dangerously soft. Let me teach you its true meaning. The vow he spoke was a lie. The rite he performed was a blasphemy. He did not give a mark. He forged one. A thief does not gain ownership of a treasure simply by scratching his name upon it. He shifted, turning fully to face the council, subtly placing himself more in front of Solara, shielding her. You see a complication. I see the final proof of his treason. The bond between fated mates is the moon's own law, older and more powerful than any vow spoken by a liar's tongue. He knew she was mine. He felt it. And in his jealousy, he sought to defile the one thing he could never possess. His gaze hardened, becoming chips of ice. He tried to put a leash on a queen, and in doing so, he showed the world he was nothing but a slave to his own ambition. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The term queen hung in the air, a deliberate and shocking claim. He was not just defending her. He was elevating her, rewriting her status before their very eyes. This Omega, Dareth continued, his voice rising in power, each word a hammer blow of conviction, is Solara of the House of Kalorn. The bond that burns on her neck was a call I heard from the deepest pit of my despair. It was the light that guided me home. It is not a mark of shame. It is the heart of this kingdom, and it belongs to me. He turned his head, and his stormy eyes found hers. In that public space, surrounded by enemies and uncertain allies, he looked at her with an intensity that stripped away everything else. It was a raw, possessive, and utterly unshakable declaration. He was not just claiming a mate, he was claiming his destiny, and she was inextricably part of it. She is my queen, he finished, his voice ringing with finality, and you will show her the respect she is owed. Any who fail to do so will answer directly to me. Silence, absolute stunned silence. Lord Vorlog stared, his mouth slightly agape, the arguments dying on his lips. The challenge had not just been met, it had been annihilated. Dareth had taken Vorlog's weapon, the law, and used it to consecrate Solara's position, transforming her from a tainted bride into a fated, sacred queen. The old wolf slowly, deliberately, lowered his head, deeper this time. It was a bow of true submission. One by one, the other alphas followed suit. A wave of acceptance rippling through the hall. They had their king back, not just a warrior, but a leader who could command with words as fiercely as with claws. Dareth held their gazes for a moment longer, ensuring his dominance was absolute. Then he turned, his duty to the pack momentarily fulfilled. His eyes found the grizzled guard, Kaelin, who was watching with fierce pride. Kaelin, secure the hall, take the traitors to the cells, double the watch on the walls. No one enters or leaves Silvercrest without my express permission. I will address the full pack at dawn. Aye, my king, Kaelin said, his voice thick with loyalty. Without another word to the council, Dareth turned and led Solara from the great hall, his purpose clear. He did not take her back to the defiled royal chambers. Instead, he led her up a winding stone staircase she had never seen, into a more ancient part of the castle. The air grew cooler, smelling of old stone, wood smoke, and something wilder, like the mountains themselves. He pushed open a heavy iron-bound door and led her into a circular room at the top of a tower. It was an alpha's roost. It was stark, masculine, and elemental. A massive, unadorned stone hearth dominated one wall, a low fire burning within it. Furs were piled on the floor and on a wide, low bed built into the stone alcove of the wall. Weapons, ancient swords, axes, and bows, hung on the walls, not as decoration, but as tools, ready and waiting. A single large, unshuttered window looked out over the sleeping forest and the moon-drenched mountains beyond. This was his space, his true throne room. He closed the door, the heavy bolt sliding home with a sound of deep finality. The sounds of the castle faded away, leaving only the whisper of the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. They were alone. The monumental effort of the past hours suddenly crashed down upon him. He swayed slightly, his hand going to the wall for support. The wound in his chest, which had been healing, was weeping blood again, staining the rags dark red. The iron will that had held him together in front of his pack was beginning to fray. Solara's fear for herself vanished, replaced by a surge of concern for him. She instinctively moved toward him, her hands hovering, unsure of what to do. He straightened, waving off her unspoken offer of help. "It is nothing." But his breath was ragged. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the king, the warrior, the alpha, all receded, leaving only the mate. He saw the trembling in her hands, the exhaustion and terror in her eyes. "He did not complete the rite?" Dareth asked, his voice a low rasp, the question costing him something to ask. She shook her head, unable to speak. "No." A measure of the tension left his shoulders. He closed his eyes for a brief second, a silent prayer of thanks to the moon. When he opened them again, his gaze was soft. He reached out and gently took the heavy tapestry from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. She stood before him in the white ceremonial gown, a stark and fragile figure in the rustic chamber. His eyes went to the mark, which was now pulsing with a soft, steady rhythm, like a second heartbeat. "Come," he said, his voice gentle. He led her to a worn wooden chair near the fire and motioned for her to sit. He knelt before her, a king kneeling before his queen, a gesture of such profound reverence it stole her breath. He reached out, his calloused fingers once again hovering just over the sensitive skin of her neck. "It is loud, your fear, your pain. I can feel it through the bond." Malik's mark was a dead thing, a scar. His gaze was mesmerizing. "This is a living bridge between us." He corrupted the vessel, but he could not taint the source. His scent, pine and a coming storm, was all around her, a comforting, intoxicating aroma that soothed the raw edges of her panic. "Be still," he whispered, his voice a hypnotic rumble. His thumb finally, deliberately, brushed against the glowing mark. The world dissolved into pure sensation. It was not the searing agony of the awakening, nor the hot fire of Dareth's rage. It was a wave of warmth, of peace, of belonging so profound it made her weep. It was the feeling of a parched soul drinking deep after a lifetime of thirst. Through his touch, she felt him. His bone-deep weariness, his monumental relief, the savage, protective love he held for her. A thing he had nurtured in the dark for what must have felt like an eternity. It was too much. A choked sob escaped her. "Easy," he murmured, his thumb stroking the mark in a slow, steady rhythm. "It is a language we must learn. Let me show you how to listen." His touch was the anchor in a world that had been spinning out of control. As his thumb continued its slow, hypnotic caress over the mark, the chaotic symphony in Solara's soul began to quiet. The shrill notes of fear and the deep, dissonant chords of shame softened, replaced by a single, rising melody. It was the music of the bond, a hum of pure, resonant truth that vibrated from the point of his touch through every fiber of her being. Through that connection, she felt the truth of his words. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a sharing. She felt the echo of his own agony, the cold stone of his cell, the slow poison of his brother's betrayal, the gnawing hunger for a mate he had never met but whose soul he knew intimately. She felt the moment of her own wedding ceremony as he had felt it, a distant, searing violation, a desecration that had given him the final, impossible strength to shatter his chains and tear his way back to her. His pain was a vast, dark ocean, and she was seeing its depths for the first time. Tears streamed silently down her face, not of sorrow for herself, but of a shared grief so profound it felt ancient. He had suffered, for his pack, for his throne, and for her. Dareth watched the play of emotions on her face, his storm-gray eyes filled with a fierce, aching tenderness. He understood what she was feeling because he was feeling her in return. He felt the brittle shell of her shame, the deep-seated belief in her own worthlessness, the years of being told she was broken, flawed, an empty vessel. And the rage that rose in him on her behalf was a clean, purifying fire. "Who told you that you were nothing?" he murmured, his voice a low growl of protective fury. The question startled her. It was so direct, so perceptive. She looked into his eyes and saw that he already knew the answer. He could feel it in the texture of her soul. My pack," she whispered, the admission costing her a piece of the loyalty she had clung to for so long. "My alpha, flawed. I cannot shift. My wolf is a whisper. I am barren." She said the last word as if it were a death sentence, the final, unforgivable sin for an omega. She expected him to recoil, for the newfound connection between them to wither. A queen, the mother of the Caelorn line, had to be strong, fertile. She was neither. Dareth did not recoil. Instead, the pressure of his thumb on the mark deepened, becoming more insistent, more possessive. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not directed at her, but at the fools who had wounded her. "Shift?" he scoffed, his voice thick with contempt for the word. "The ability to change your skin is a parlor trick for lesser wolves. True power is not in the shape of your body, but in the strength of your spirit." His gaze bored into hers, demanding she believe him. "Your spirit called to me across a continent, through silver wards and stone walls. It shattered my prison. Do you think a whisper can do that? No, Solara, you have a roar inside you. They just taught you to be silent." As for the other word, the one that had haunted her every waking moment, "Barren," he said, tasting the word as if it were poison. "That is their word, the word of farmers, concerned with bloodlines and succession. It is not the language of mates." He leaned closer, the firelight catching the silver in his eyes, making them blaze. "They see you as a vessel for children. I see you as the other half of my soul. If the moon blesses us with pups, they will be a gift, but they are not the reason. You are the reason." His vow, spoken with such raw, absolute conviction, was a hammer blow to the foundations of her self-loathing. It was everything she had never known she needed to hear. A truth so powerful it began to heal wounds she thought were fatal. He wasn't just accepting her flaws. He was dismissing them as irrelevant, as lies told by lesser men. He saw her, the real her, beneath the layers of shame and duty, and he found her worthy. Her dormant wolf, which had been stirring, now rose up within her, not with a roar, but with a deep, resonant purr of pure contentment. It stretched its spiritual limbs, basking in the warmth of his acceptance, of his claim. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel broken. She felt seen. "Now," he said, his voice softening again, pulling her from the depths of their shared emotions. "The poison, Malik's touch lingers on the mark. A forgery laid over the truth. It must be cleansed." He rose from his knees and went to the hearth, taking a small iron pot that sat warming in the embers. He brought it back, along with a clean strip of linen. The pot contained a dark, fragrant oil, smelling of mountain herbs, pine sap, and something else, something distinctly his. He knelt before her again, dipping the cloth into the warm oil. "This will not hurt," he promised, his voice a low vibration that soothed her nerves. He gently tilted her head to the side, exposing the throbbing silver mark. With infinite care, he began to clean it, his movements as deliberate and focused as a priest tending a sacred altar. The warm, scented oil was a balm against her skin, but it was his touch that performed the true magic. With every pass of the cloth, he was not just wiping away the physical trace of Malik. He was erasing the spiritual stain, reclaiming his territory with a gentle reverence that was more powerful than any act of violence. Under his ministrations, the frantic, jagged energy that had clung to the mark dissolved. The silver glow softened, losing its feverish brightness and settling into a deep, steady lunar luminescence. It no longer felt like a brand. It felt like a part of her, a living extension of her own soul that was finally in harmony. When he was finished, he tossed the cloth into the fire, where it flared up and vanished, a symbolic destruction of the last remnant of his brother's claim. He looked at her, his work complete. The weariness was still etched on his face, but a deep satisfaction shone in his eyes. He had righted a profound wrong. "It is done," he murmured. He remained kneeling before her, and the silence that stretched between them was no longer filled with tension or uncertainty. It was a comfortable, breathing silence, the kind shared by two people who no longer need words. The wind howled around the tower, a wild song of the mountains, but inside there was only the crackle of the fire and the steady, synchronized beat of two hearts. Finally, the exhaustion of the night, the ceremony, the revelation, the coup, the overwhelming emotional release, crashed over Solara. A wave of dizziness made her sway in the chair. Dareth was instantly alert, his hands steadying her shoulders. "You are exhausted." She could only nod, leaning into his strength for a moment. He was solid, real, a mountain in the midst of the earthquake her life had become. "You must rest," he commanded softly. He stood, and with an ease that belied his own fatigue, he scooped her up into his arms. Solara gasped, her arms instinctively going around his neck. She was weightless to him. He carried her as if she were the most precious treasure in his kingdom. He crossed the room to the wide, fur-draped bed built into the alcove. The furs were thick and soft, smelling of cedar, leather, and his own intoxicating scent. He laid her down gently, pulling a heavy wolf pelt blanket over her. The comfort was so absolute, so profound, that her eyes fluttered shut. She was safe. For the first time in her memory, she felt utterly and completely safe. She felt him hesitate beside the bed. She cracked her eyes open to see him looking down at her, his expression a conflict of raw desire and fierce restraint. The bond thrummed between them, a potent, undeniable pull. He was her mate. This was their first night. The primal instincts of the wolf would be screaming at him to claim her, to complete the bond fully, to wash away the memory of his brother with his own body. But he was more than a beast. He was a king. He saw the fear that still lingered in the depths of her eyes, the shadow of a lifetime of trauma. He saw a soul that needed to heal before it could fully join with another. With a visible effort of will, he banked the fire in his gaze. He reached down, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Sleep, Solara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "No one will harm you here. I will keep watch." He turned to leave, intending to take a seat by the fire, to stand guard over her as she slept. But a sudden, impulsive bravery seized her, the whisper of her own wolf, finally finding its voice. "Don't go," she breathed, her voice small but clear in the quiet room. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. He froze, turning back to her. The storm was back in his eyes, churning with surprise, and a hope so fierce it was almost painful to see. "Stay," she said, a little stronger this time. "Please." It wasn't an invitation to the mating bed. It was a plea for proximity, for the simple, anchoring comfort of his presence. A slow understanding dawned on his face. He gave a single, solemn nod. He did not get under the furs with her. Instead, with a weary groan, he settled on top of the blankets, laying down beside her, a solid breathing wall of warmth and strength at her back. He made no move to touch her, save for one. He took her small, cold hand in his large, warm one, his fingers lacing through hers. The contact was electric, a quiet affirmation of their connection. With her back pressed against his side, his hand holding hers, and the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, a silent lullaby, Solara finally let go. The darkness that claimed her was not the terrifying abyss of her recent life, but a deep, healing, dreamless sleep. She was home, and for the first time, the Omega who had been sold, shamed, and branded, fell asleep in the arms of her king, feeling not like a prisoner, but like a queen. Solara awoke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the tower window. For a blissful, disoriented moment, she knew only two things: the profound comfort of the heavy furs surrounding her, and the solid warmth pressed against her back. Her hand was still clasped in his, a secure anchor that had held her through the night. The scent of pine and storm was the first thing she registered, a fragrance that her soul now equated with safety. Then, memory crashed down upon her, the false wedding, Malik's cruelty, Dareth's impossible return, the cleansing of the mark. Her eyes snapped open. Dareth was already awake. He was still lying beside her, on top of the furs, but he had shifted to prop himself up on one elbow, watching her. The nascent light softened the harsh lines of his face, revealing the deep exhaustion etched around his eyes. He hadn't slept. He had kept his vow. He had watched over her through the night. The storm in his eyes was calm this morning, like the quiet aftermath of a great tempest. When his gaze met hers, a slow, gentle warmth spread from the mark on her neck through her entire body. There was no need for words. The bond, cleansed and pure, spoke for them in a silent language of contentment and relief. "Good morning, my queen," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble in the quiet room. The title still sent a jolt through her, a mixture of terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. He said it with such conviction, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was trying to rebuild her world, and that was the cornerstone he was laying. "You didn't sleep," she stated, her own voice soft, husky from rest. A faint smile, the first she had ever seen from him, touched the corner of his mouth. It was a small, weary thing, but it transformed his face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the warrior king's facade. "I have slept in a stone cell for months, dreaming of this. I was not about to waste the reality of it on sleep." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a simple, possessive gesture that sent a shiver of awareness through her. The intimacy of the moment, the quiet of the dawn, the reality of him beside her, it was overwhelming. She was keenly aware of the thinness of her ceremonial gown, of the sheer physical power of the man beside her. Yet there was no threat in his presence, only a profound sense of protection. The spell was broken by a low, insistent knock on the tower door. Dareth's eyes hardened, the brief moment of peace gone. The king returned, his features settling back into a mask of command. He released her hand and rose from the bed in one fluid, powerful motion. "Enter," he commanded. The grizzled guard, Kaelin, entered, his eyes respectfully averted from the bed. He carried a tray laden with a steaming pitcher, bread, cheese, and a fresh set of clothes, simple dark leather trousers and a tunic, the practical attire of a warrior, not a king. "My king," Kaelin said, bowing his head. "The sun has risen. The pack is gathering in the great hall, as you commanded. Lord Vorlag and the council await your judgment." He paused, his gaze flickering nervously toward Solara. "And there is news of the prisoner." Dareth's posture went rigid. "Speak." "He is awake," Kaelin reported, his voice grim, "and he is demanding to speak with the queen. He claims the bond gives him that right. He says she is still his wife." Solara's blood ran cold. The fragile peace of the morning shattered. Malik. His poison was still seeping through the cracks in the castle walls. The idea of him invoking the bond, the sacred connection he had defiled, was a blasphemy that made her stomach turn. A low, dangerous growl vibrated in Dareth's chest. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with his fury. "He has no rights," he snarled. "He will rot in that cell until I decide his fate. Tell him if he speaks her name again, I will cut out his tongue myself." Kaelin bowed again, clearly relieved by the order. "Aye, my king." He placed the tray on a heavy wooden table. "Your clothes, your majesty. And I have brought a healer for your wound." Dareth glanced down at the bloody rent in his tunic, a wound he had all but ignored. "There is no time. The pack has waited long enough." He dismissed the guard with a nod. Kaelin bowed a final time and retreated, closing the door softly behind him. Dareth turned, his eyes finding Solara's. He saw the fear that had returned to her face. He crossed the room in 2 strides, coming to stand by the bed. "He cannot touch you," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. "He cannot speak to you. His lies have no more power here. I will not allow it." She believed him, but the very mention of Malik's name was a reminder of the tangled web she was caught in. Lord Vorlog's words from the night before echoed in her mind. A king cannot take his brother's wife. Dareth had silenced him with a show of dominance, but the sentiment, the tradition, still lingered in the hearts of the pack. She was a problem he would have to solve. Dareth seemed to read her thoughts. The council will be difficult, he admitted, his voice grim. They are old wolves, steeped in tradition. They fear change more than they fear war. They will see you as a complication to the succession, a threat to the stability I have just reclaimed. He began to strip off the tattered remnants of his prisoner's rags, his movements economical and efficient. Solara's eyes were drawn to the play of muscle across his back and shoulders, a landscape of raw power and old scars. Each white line on his skin told a story of a battle fought, a challenge met. He was a king forged in combat, not in courtly intrigue. He turned, and she saw the wound on his chest more clearly. It was a deep, ugly gash, inflamed and barely closed. "You are hurt," she insisted, her own anxieties momentarily forgotten. She slid off the bed, pulling the fur blanket around her shoulders like a cloak, and went to the tray Kaelin had brought. She poured hot water from the pitcher into a basin. "You cannot face them like this. Let me." He watched her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected her to cower, to retreat into her fear. He had not expected this quiet, determined act of care. It was a queenly gesture, a mate's instinct. After a moment's hesitation, he gave a curt nod and sat in the chair by the fire, submitting to her care. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached him with the basin and a clean cloth. Kneeling before him, just as he had knelt before her the night before, she began to clean the wound. His skin was hot to the touch, radiating a feverish energy. The gash was deeper than she'd thought, the edges ragged where the sword point had scraped against bone. Any lesser wolf would have been incapacitated. As her fingers gently worked, cleaning the blood and grime, an odd sense of calm settled over her. This was something she could do, a simple, tangible act. She was not a warrior, she was not a politician, but she could be this. She could be a balm to his wounds, a quiet space in the heart of his storm. He was utterly still under her touch. His head bowed, his eyes closed. She could feel the tension in his shoulders, the monumental weight of the decisions he was about to make. The fate of his brother, the loyalty of his council, the future of the Silver Packs. It all rested on him. "What will you do?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "With him? With Malik?" He opened his eyes. They were dark, troubled. "The law demands his life," he said, his voice flat. "Treason, usurpation. The attempted murder of a king. There is no other sentence." Solara's hands stilled. She had seen the hatred between them, the violence. She had expected this, yet hearing it stated so plainly sent a chill through her. He was his twin, his other half, no matter how corrupted. To order his execution. What would that do to Dareth's own soul? "He is your blood," she whispered. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "He stopped being my blood when he conspired with my enemies and left me to rot in the dark." His voice was harsh, but she could hear the undercurrent of pain, the ghost of a bond that had been betrayed beyond all repair. "I will do what a king must do." She finished cleaning the wound, her touch gentle. He had saved her. Now, in this small way, she was trying to save a piece of him. "A king's greatest strength," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence, "is not in his rage. It is in his wisdom." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift just a fraction. He saw not a timid Omega, but a partner, a counselor, a queen. He reached up, his hand covering hers where it rested on his chest, stilling her movements. "My brother was a strategist," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "He built alliances in the shadows. His poison has spread further than I know. If I execute him, I make him a martyr to his followers. It could splinter the packs and ignite the very war I seek to avoid." He was thinking aloud, sharing the burden of his crown with her. It was a sign of trust so profound it made her heart ache. "But if I let him live," he continued, his grip on her hand tightening, "he remains a threat. A rallying point for every wolf who resents my rule, a whisper of rebellion that will never die." He was trapped between two impossible choices, each with devastating consequences. Solara looked into his eyes, into the eye of the storm, and saw the terrible loneliness of a king. "Then you must find a third path," she said, the words coming to her with a certainty she didn't know she possessed. "One that is neither rage nor weakness, one that shows the pack that their true king is a ruler of strength and of mercy. He stared at her, the wheels of his formidable mind turning. He had been so consumed by the need for retribution, by the primal urge to destroy the one who had wronged him, that he had only seen the path of blood. She was showing him another way. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. It was not a smile of happiness, but of respect, of recognition. A third path, he repeated softly. My wise queen. He stood, pulling on the fresh tunic and trousers. Dressed, he was no longer the wounded escapee, but every inch the Alpha King. He strapped a heavy leather belt around his waist, from which hung a formidable, unadorned sword. The crown was not on his head, but it was in his posture, in the set of his jaw, in the fire in his eyes. He turned to her. The council will not accept you easily. They will try to use you against me. Stay here. You will be safe. A year ago, a day ago, she would have obeyed without question, grateful to hide from the conflict. But something had shifted in her during the night. The wolf he had seen in her was beginning to believe in itself. No, she said, her voice steady. She rose to her feet, letting the fur blanket fall away, standing before him in the simple white dress of a false bride. You named me your queen in front of them all. If I hide now, they will see me as a weakness you are trying to protect, a liability. They will think your claim was a boast made in anger, not a truth. I will stand with you. He looked at her, a fierce pride warring with his protective instincts. He saw the iron in her spine, the resolve in her eyes. She was right. To hide her would be to diminish her, and by extension, himself. They will be cruel, he warned, his voice low. I have survived cruelty my entire life, she answered, her chin high. I am not afraid of old men's words. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. Then he gave a single, sharp nod of assent. Then stand with me, Solara of the House of Caelorn, and let them see what a true queen looks like. He offered her his arm, just as he had the night before, but this time, when she took it, it was not as a rescued victim. It was as a partner. Together they walked toward the door, toward the judgment of the council and the dawn of a new reign, ready to face the whispers in the stone, together. The great hall was a different entity in the morning light. The chaos of the night had been cleared away, but a palpable tension remained, clinging to the air like the lingering scent of old smoke. The long tables had been righted, but the hall was not set for a feast. It was arranged as a court. The council of alphas and elders sat at a heavy table on a raised dais, their faces grim, their postures rigid. Below them, the rest of the pack, the warriors, the chieftains, the den mothers, stood in a silent, watchful semicircle. When Dareth entered with Solara on his arm, a collective intake of breath rippled through the assembly. He strode to the center of the hall, his presence an undeniable force of gravity, pulling every eye toward him. He wore no crown, no regal furs, only the simple leather and steel of a warrior. It was a clear statement. He was not here to rule from a place of inherited privilege, but from a foundation of pure, unassailable strength. Solara felt the hundreds of eyes on her, a physical pressure. They raked over her white ceremonial gown, a stark reminder of her role in the previous day's deception. Whispers slithered through the crowd like snakes in dry leaves. The pretender's bride, unclean, a barren omega. She kept her head high, her hand resting on Dareth's arm, drawing strength from his solid presence. She would not let them see her fear. She had promised him she would stand, and she would not falter. Dareth did not move to the empty throne that sat on the dais, the seat of kings. Instead, he remained on the floor with his people, a king among them, not above them. He let the silence stretch, his stormy gaze sweeping over every face, assessing, judging, commanding respect, without a single word. Finally, Lord Vorlog, the proud old chieftain, rose from his seat on the dais. King Dareth, he began, his voice a formal, rumbling baritone. The pack rejoices in your return and acknowledges your rightful place as Alpha of the Silver Packs. He paused, his eyes flicking to Solara with open disapproval. However, matters of law and succession must be addressed. Last night, in the heat of your righteous fury, you made claims. The pack requires clarity. The stability of the kingdom depends on it. Then you shall have it, Dareth replied, his voice calm, but carrying the clear undertone of steel. Speak your concerns plainly, Vorlog. Let us have no more shadows in this hall. Vorlog straightened, accepting the challenge. The woman at your side wears the mark of your brother, a mark given in a sacred rite, witnessed by all. By law, she is his wife. By blood, she is now your kin. To take her for yourself would be a transgression against the old ways. The old ways were created to honor the will of the moon, not the schemes of liars, Dareth countered, his voice sharp. The rite was a fraud. The mark was a theft. There is no marriage. There is only a crime and a victim. He turned his head slightly, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second as he looked at Solara, a silent reassurance. The moon has already shown its will. The bond between us is a living fire. It is the only law that matters. A bond, another elder scoffed, a stout, red-faced alpha named Grohl. We have only your word on this bond. We see a usurper's bride, a barren omega, from a weak pack, offered up to seal a traitor's alliance. How can such a creature be the fated queen of the Kalorn line? The line must continue. A barren queen threatens our future. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and raw. It was the heart of their fear. It wasn't about love or fate. It was about power, heirs, and the continuation of the pack. Solara flinched, the word barren striking her like a physical blow. Her deepest shame laid bare for the entire pack to see. She felt her resolve waver, the old feelings of worthlessness creeping back in. Before Dareth could unleash the fury that was gathering in his eyes, Solara did something she had never done in her life. She acted. Gently, she removed her hand from Dareth's arm. She took one step forward, alone, into the center of the hall. She was no longer hiding in his shadow. The hall fell silent, surprised by her audacity. She was just an omega, robed in the shame of another man's claim, and she had dared to take the floor. She lifted her chin, her gaze meeting Grohl's without fear. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was clear and steady, imbued with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. You speak of the future of the pack, Lord Grohl, she began. You see only a womb, empty or full. But is the strength of a pack measured only in the number of its pups? She turned, her gaze sweeping across the assembled wolves, meeting the eyes of the warriors, the den mothers, the elders. I have seen packs that were plentiful in number, but rotten at the core, weakened by ambition and backbiting. I have seen packs that were small, but were bound by a loyalty so fierce they were unbreakable. The future of the silver packs is not in my womb, it is in your hearts. Her voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction born of a lifetime of observation from the shadows. Your king has returned, not from a peaceful journey, but from a pit of betrayal and despair. He carries wounds you cannot see. He has taken back his throne, but the kingdom is fractured. Will you spend this precious time squabbling over tradition and bloodlines? Will you weaken him with your doubt, forcing him to fight a war inside his own hall before he can face the enemies outside? She took another step, her eyes finding Lord Vorlog's. You speak of law, I speak of loyalty. You speak of succession, I speak of survival. Dareth is your king. He needs a united pack behind him. He needs a queen who will be a source of strength and counsel, not just a vessel for his heirs. She placed a hand over her own heart. My soul is bound to his. My loyalty is to him, and to all of you. Is that not a foundation upon which a strong future can be built? She fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the torches. She had laid her soul bare, offering them not the strength of a breeder, but the strength of an unbound spirit, a loyal heart. She had taken their greatest criticism, her barrenness, and reframed it, not as a weakness, but as a reason to look for a different, deeper kind of strength. A low murmur went through the crowd. She saw nods of respect from some of the warriors, looks of thoughtful consideration on the faces of the den mothers. She had not cowed them with power, but she had touched them with her truth. Dareth watched her, and the look on his face was one of fierce, unadulterated pride. He had known there was a roar inside her, and the whole pack had just heard its echo. But the council was not so easily swayed. Lord Vorlog, while clearly impressed, was still bound by his rigid worldview. Words, however eloquent, do not change the law, he said stubbornly. The mark of Malik remains a stain. There must be a cleansing, a trial, a way to prove this. Fated bond you speak of is real, and not merely a convenience. A trial? Dareth's voice was a low growl. She has been through enough trials. Nevertheless, Vorlog insisted, slamming his fist on the table, the pack must be satisfied. There is an old way. The rite of unbinding. It is dangerous, archaic. But it is the only true way to sever a false mark and prove a true one. It would cleanse her of Malik's claim forever and show the pack the truth of your bond. If it is as strong as you say, you will survive it. If not, he left the threat hanging in the air. Solara saw a flicker of something in Dareth's eyes, not fear, but a deep primal hesitation. He knew of this rite, and it worried him. "What is this rite?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, directed at Vorlog. The old wolf's eyes gleamed with a fanatic's light. "The two of you, the Alpha and the Claimant, must enter the Heartstone chamber beneath the castle. You will place your hands upon the ancient stone, and the one who bears the false mark must willingly renounce it. The magic of the Heartstone will then sever the connection. It is an excruciating process, a spiritual scouring. It will leave the claimant's soul raw, open, utterly vulnerable. In that moment of perfect vulnerability," he continued, his gaze locking on Dareth, "the true Alpha must then place his own mark, claiming the soul before it is lost to the void. It requires a bond of absolute trust, a connection so powerful it can withstand having the world ripped away. Many have not survived it. Their minds shatter, their spirits flee. It is a terrible risk. So this was their solution, a trial by magical fire, a way to give them the proof they demanded, wrapped in the solemnity of ancient tradition. It was a cruel and dangerous test, designed to break her." Solara looked at Dareth. His jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He was preparing to refuse, to tell them all to go to hell, to start a civil war right there in the hall to protect her. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. He had fought his way back for her. Now she would fight for him. She would not be the cause of a war in his own pack. She would not be his weakness. "I will do it," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Every head in the hall snapped toward her. Dareth turned, his eyes wide with shock and protest. "Solara, no, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, meeting his gaze, her own filled with a calm resolve. "They need proof. They need to see that the stain of your brother is gone. They need to believe in our bond. You told me my spirit was strong enough to shatter your prison. Is it not strong enough for this?" She was using his own words, his own faith in her, as her shield and her sword. "This is not a debate," she said, turning back to the council. "It is my choice. I am the one who wears the false mark. I will have it scoured away, and I will prove to you all that my rightful place is at the side of your king." Dareth stared at her, a war of emotions playing out on his face. Rage at the council for demanding this, terror for her safety, and an overwhelming, breathtaking awe at the fierce, brave queen who stood before him. She was not asking his permission. She was making a choice. She was taking her own power. He slowly, deliberately closed the distance between them. He stood before her, his hands coming up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. He ignored the entire pack, the entire world. In that moment, there was only the two of them. "You do not have to do this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she whispered back, her hands covering his. "I do, for us." He searched her eyes, and what he saw there was not the frightened Omega he had rescued, but the unbreakable soul he had always known was his. With a final solemn nod, he accepted her choice. He turned to the council, his voice booming with the king's command, all hesitation gone. "So be it. Prepare the Heartstone chamber. The pack will have its proof, and you will have your queen." He looked back at Solara, a silent vow passing between them, a promise of utter faith. Let the rite of unbinding begin. The descent into the heart of the mountain was a journey into silence. The torches of the guards cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls, but the sound of their footsteps seemed to be swallowed by the deep, ancient rock. Dareth walked beside Solara, his hand a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. He did not speak. There were no words left that could prepare her for this. There was only the silent, resolute language of their bond, a current of strength and unwavering faith flowing from him to her. Behind them, the council of elders followed, their faces grim and solemn. Lord Vorlog led them, his expression a mask of stern duty. This was his law, his tradition, and he would see it done. The rest of the pack waited above, a silent, anxious vigil in the great hall. They arrived in a circular cavern, so deep beneath the castle that the air was cool and still, tasting of stone and time. In the center of the cavern stood the Heartstone. It was not a sculpted altar, but a massive, raw monolith of dark, veined rock that rose from the floor to the ceiling, pulsing with a faint internal luminescence. It hummed with a low, subaudible vibration, the slumbering heartbeat of the mountain itself. The air around it was thick with the weight of ages, with the echoes of 1,000 generations of Kylorn Alphas who had come here to connect with the soul of their land. The rite demands a willing sacrifice, Vorlog's voice echoed in the cavern, unnaturally loud in the profound silence. The false mark must be renounced by the one who bears it. The soul must be offered up to the stone's judgment. Only then can it be cleansed. He looked at Solara, his old eyes searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Once you begin, you cannot stop. The stone will not release you until the work is done or until it has consumed you. Do you understand? Solara looked not at him, but at Dareth. In the deep, stormy gray of his eyes, she saw no command, no expectation. She saw only a terrifying vulnerability, a raw fear for her that he could not hide. He was entrusting her, the most precious part of his world, to this brutal, archaic magic. His faith in her was a heavier and more precious burden than any crown. "I understand," she said, her voice clear and strong. She turned to the Heartstone. It was time. Dareth led her to the monolith. The stone was cool to the touch, its surface smooth as river rock. The faint hum vibrated up her arm, a deep and ancient power that recognized the turmoil in her soul. "Place your hand beside hers," Vorlog instructed Dareth. "Your bond must be the anchor that keeps her spirit from fleeing entirely." Dareth placed his large, scarred hand flat against the stone, just beside her small one. The moment he did, the connection between them flared, magnified by the stone's energy. She could feel his strength, his love, a fierce, protective wall around her. It was the last gift he could give her before she stepped into the fire. "Now, little Omega," Vorlog commanded, his voice softening with a reluctant awe at her courage. "Speak the renunciation. Cast it from you." Solara closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. She focused on the cold, dead feeling of Malik's mark, the memory of his thin smirk, his cruel words, the spiritual filth of his touch. She gathered up all the shame, the fear, the violation, into a single point of energy. "I am Solara of the House of Kylorn," she began, her voice ringing against the stone. "I wear a mark that is a lie. It was placed upon me by a false king, in a rite of deception. It is not my bond. It is not my vow." She opened her eyes, her gaze clear and resolute. "I renounce it. I cast it out. I give it to the stone to be unmade." The moment the words left her lips, the Heartstone roared to life. The faint luminescence erupted into a blinding white light. A wave of pure, agonizing power surged from the stone and into her, aimed directly at the corrupted mark. A scream was torn from her throat, a sound of pure spiritual evisceration. It was the feeling of her soul being scoured with fire and ice. The silver mark on her neck blazed with a black, unholy light as the stone's magic attacked the forgery, tearing it from her spirit thread by painful thread. Through the bond, Dareth felt an echo of her agony. It was 1,000 times worse than any physical wound he had ever suffered. Every instinct screamed at him to rip her away from the stone, to destroy the cavern, to kill the elders for demanding this. But he held his ground, his hand pressed firm against the rock, pouring every ounce of his strength, his love, his very essence into their connection, a desperate lifeline in a hurricane of pain. "Stay with me, Solara. I am here. Do not let go." She felt him. Through the blinding, searing pain, she felt his presence, his unwavering love. It was the only thing that kept her from dissolving into the light. The black fire on her neck intensified, and she felt a final, violent tearing sensation, as if a part of her was being ripped away. The false mark was gone, and then, nothing. The pain vanished. The light faded. There was only a vast, silent, gray emptiness. She was adrift. A ghost in her own body. The void. Her soul was unbound, raw, featureless. There was no pain here, but there was no feeling at all. It was a cold, quiet peace, a gentle suggestion to simply let go, to drift away and be done with the struggle. It was in that moment of absolute vulnerability that Dareth acted. With a roar that was part lion, part wolf, part storm, he pulled her away from the hearthstone. He spun her into his arms, his grip like iron, holding her collapsing form against his chest. Her eyes were open but vacant, her soul balanced on the knife's edge of oblivion. "Mine," he growled, the word a promise, a vow, a declaration of sacred ownership that echoed with the mountain's own power. He lowered his head to her neck, to the newly bare, tender skin where the false mark had been. This was not the clinical bite of Malik, nor was it a savage claiming born of rage. It was an act of creation. As his fangs pierced her skin, a blaze of pure silver moonlight erupted from him, pouring into her. It was not a taking, but a giving. He poured his soul into the void, filling the emptiness with his strength, his memories, his unwavering love. He gave her the scent of pine and storm, the feeling of the wind on the highest mountain peak, the fierce loyalty of the pack, the quiet wisdom of a king. He filled every broken place inside her, not to patch it, but to remake it, to forge it into something stronger, something that was both hers and theirs. Solara gasped, a shuddering, life-affirming breath. The gray void was annihilated by a supernova of silver light. She felt him, felt the entirety of him flooding her soul, and in the heart of that consuming fire, her own wolf, her own spirit rose to meet his, not as a whisper, but as a matching roar. She was not being filled, she was being completed. When he drew back, she was trembling in his arms, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but they were no longer vacant. They were alive, blazing with an inner light she had never possessed before. On her neck, a new mark bloomed. It was not the thorny vine of Malik's forgery. It was a delicate, intricate spiral of silver, like a galaxy, with a blazing silver crescent moon at its heart. It was a living constellation, thrumming with the quiet, powerful heartbeat of their joined souls. She lifted a trembling hand to his face, her fingers tracing the scar by his eye. "Dareth," she whispered, her voice full of a wonder and love so profound it was humbling. He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was both a seal and a promise. It was a kiss of homecoming, of battles won, of a love that had literally conquered the void. When they finally broke apart, they became aware of the cavern around them. Every single elder, including the stern Lord Vorlog, was on one knee, their heads bowed low. They were not just submitting to their king. They were paying homage to their queen. 1 year later, Solara stood on the balcony of the Alpha's tower, the cool night air a welcome caress against her skin. Below, the kingdom of Silvercrest was peaceful, bathed in the light of a full moon. The weight of the heavy, fur-lined cloak she wore was comforting, familiar. It was the cloak Dareth had given her that first night. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. Dareth rested his chin on her shoulder, his own gaze sweeping over their domain. The quiet language of their bond flowed between them, a constant, gentle hum of love and contentment. The year had been one of rebuilding. True to her counsel, Dareth had found a third path for his brother. Malik had been publicly stripped of his name and titles and exiled to a remote, fortified monastery in the far west, to live out his days in silent contemplation of his crimes. It was a sentence of living death, a display of mercy so cold it was more terrifying than the executioner's axe. It had solidified Dareth's rule as one of both unshakable strength and profound wisdom. With Solara at his side, he had reforged the alliances, healed the fractures within the packs, and brought a new era of prosperity and respect to his people. She was his most trusted advisor, his partner in all things. Her quiet strength, her keen observations, her unshakable loyalty, they had become the bedrock of his reign. Her wolf, now fully awakened, was a calm, powerful presence within her, a constant connection to her mate and her pack. They had discovered, to the surprise of everyone, that while she could not shift her skin, her spirit could walk the paths of the wind, a rare gift of sight that had proven more valuable than the claws of 100 warriors. She was not barren, she was boundless. The council is still petitioning for an heir, Dareth murmured against her ear, his voice laced with amusement. Solara smiled, leaning her head back against his shoulder. Let them petition. They have their kingdom. They have their king. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his jaw. The silver mark on her neck glowed with a soft, steady light, a perfect mirror to the love shining in his eyes. And their king has his queen. That is enough for now. He bent his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was as deep and familiar as the mountain beneath their feet. The future could wait. Heirs could wait. For now, in the heart of their kingdom, under the watchful eye of the silver moon, the Alpha and his fated queen were exactly where they were always meant to be, home.